Let me start with a scene most people never heard about. February 14th, 2026. The Baltic Sea. It's minus 6 degrees Celsius. Winds are howling. Snow is coating the deck of a warship. Freezing conditions so severe that NATO aircraft across the entire exercise are grounded. Fighter jets, helicopters, all of them sitting still. All of them except one. A drone with folding wings launches off a short ski jump deck, climbs into that gray freezing sky, finds its target on the ocean surface, and fires 2 precision-guided missiles. Both hit. Direct impact. Then it lands itself, autonomously, on the moving ice-covered deck of the ship. That moment, witnessed live by NATO commanders from across the alliance, rewrote the rulebook on what a navy could do. And that ship, that drone, that country doing things in the freezing Baltic that no one else could manage, Turkey. Yes, Turkey. The country many people still associate with baklava, heated arguments about whose food is whose, and a history of disagreements with pretty much every neighbor it has, especially one neighbor in particular, but we'll get to that, because behind all the noise, behind all the drama, something very different is happening. Turkey in 2026 is not just a NATO member trying to keep its seat at the table. It is rewriting the rules of what a regional power can look like, using drones, geography, naval doctrine, and a defense industry that has gone from $0 to $10 billion in exports in under a decade. And once you understand the full picture, the straits, the drones, the fighter jet that just flew for the first time, the maritime claims that are driving Greece absolutely insane, you'll understand why military analysts have stopped calling Turkey a middle power. They've started calling it something else entirely. Before we get into the hardware, let's talk about the one thing Turkey has that no amount of money can buy. Geography. Take a map, find the point where Europe ends and Asia begins. Find the narrow waterway that connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. That's the Bosphorus. And just slightly to the southwest, those are the Dardanelles. Those 2 straits together, controlled entirely by Turkish territory on both sides, are probably the most strategically important choke points in the entire northern hemisphere, and Turkey controls them both. Under something called the Montreux Convention, signed in 1936, Turkey has the legal authority to restrict military vessels from passing through those straits during times of conflict. And in 2022, when Russia invaded Ukraine, Turkey did exactly that. It closed the straits to all warships from non-Black Sea nations, including Russia's own fleet trying to reinforce its Black Sea naval presence. Think about what that actually means. Russia, with one of the largest navies on Earth, cannot resupply its Black Sea fleet through its most natural route without Turkish permission. That's not supporting NATO from a distance. That's Turkey sitting on the jugular vein of Russian naval strategy, while still picking up the phone when Moscow calls, selling drones to Ukraine, and somehow managing to stay out of direct sanctions. Erdogan is basically playing 3-dimensional chess, while everyone else is still setting up the board. The full picture starts with drones. If you've been following military news for the last 5 years, you've heard the name Bayraktar, and specifically the TB2, the drone that became famous in Ukraine, in Libya, in Nagorno-Karabakh. The drone that punched so far above its weight class that it forced military planners worldwide to rethink everything they thought they knew about cheap unmanned systems. Turkey didn't stop there, because the TB2 had one limitation that drove Baykar's engineers absolutely crazy. It couldn't operate from a ship. It needed a runway, so they built one that didn't. The Bayraktar TB3. Folding wings, reinforced landing gear, autonomous takeoff and landing system, designed specifically to operate off the deck of Turkey's amphibious assault ship, the TCG Anadolu, which, not coincidentally, happens to be the world's first purpose-built military drone carrier. Not a converted cruise ship, not a repurposed helicopter platform, a ship built from the ground up to launch and recover combat drones. And that February 14th demonstration in the Baltic, where the TB3 flew 232 total sorties in freezing temperatures, operated for 8-hour flights over the Baltic coastline near Estonia, and completed a joint exercise with German Air Force Eurofighter Typhoons, wasn't a test, it was a statement. The NATO commander present, General Ingo Gerhards, stood on the deck of the Anadolu and watched the strike. Then he said on record, "I am very grateful to the Turkish Armed Forces for such an important and remarkable contribution."
Ich bin sehr beeindruckt über die Fähigkeiten hier der Anadolu. Und ohnehin bin ich sehr dankbar als verantwortlicher NATO-Befehlshaber.
The fired munition had an inscription on the side. It said, "Blue Homeland knows no boundaries." More on that phrase in a moment. Speaking of those fighter jets, a country that was importing 80% of its military equipment in 2002 just crossed $10 billion in defense exports and then built a stealth fighter. This is the part that genuinely surprised the defense world. Turkey was part of the F-35 program. It had factories producing components for the aircraft, orders placed, pilots in training. Then in 2019, after Turkey purchased the Russian S-400 air defense system, the United States removed Turkey from the entire program. The American calculation was Turkey made its choice, it's out. Turkey's response was essentially, fine, we'll build our own. The KAAN fighter jet, twin engine, stealth design, internal weapons bays, advanced avionics, the kind of aircraft that when you first heard Turkey was working on it prompted a lot of experts to politely raise their eyebrows and say things like, very ambitious project, which in the defense world is the diplomatic way of saying, we'll believe it when we see it. Well, they're seeing it. In February 2026, Turkish Aerospace Industries unveiled 3 separate KAAN prototypes at their facility in Ankara. The second prototype, P1, introduced significant design changes from the original, a slightly shorter fuselage, reworked air intakes, redesigned frontal section to improve stealth characteristics. The first full-flight prototype was scheduled for takeoff in May or June 2026, with serial production deliveries targeting 2029. To put that in context, Turkey went from being expelled from the F-35 program to having a domestic stealth fighter in flight testing in 7 years. No other country that has ever been cut off from a major Western defense program has responded by simply building the equivalent from scratch and getting it airborne this fast. And the export pipeline is already full. Indonesia signed for 48 aircraft. Saudi Arabia is negotiating for potentially 100. Spain, which already signed a deal for Turkish jet trainers, has been mentioned in defense circles as a potential future customer for the KAAN as an F-35 alternative. Ukraine has expressed interest. The UAE is watching closely. The plane that was supposed to humiliate Turkey is turning into one of its biggest geopolitical assets. Now we have to talk about Greece, because no discussion of Turkish military power is complete without acknowledging the world's most complicated neighborhood dispute. Picture 2 NATO allies, same alliance, shared commitments on paper to defend each other if attacked, yet operating fighter jets that routinely shadow each other over the Aegean, filing formal protests at the UN, staring each other down over rocks and islets, so small you could miss them on a standard map. That is Greece and Turkey in 2026. The tension has a formal name, the Aegean dispute, but calling it a dispute is a bit like calling World War I a disagreement. It covers airspace, continental shelves, island sovereignty, energy rights, territorial waters, and a philosophical question that has no clean legal answer. Whose sea is the Aegean anyway? Greece's answer, ours under international law, which we signed and Turkey didn't. Turkey's answer, this is a shared sea and we want our share of it, thank you very much. In January 2026, Turkey issued a NAVTEX, a formal maritime notice, declaring that all research activities east of the 25th meridian, essentially half the Aegean, must be coordinated with Turkish authorities, not temporarily, indefinitely. Greece filed formal protest with the IMO, called it illegal, and said it would continue exercising its sovereign rights regardless. The timing was deliberate. It came just before a scheduled summit between Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis and Turkish President Erdogan. In any other relationship, issuing a territorial claim the week before sitting down for diplomatic talks would be considered hostile. In Greek-Turkish relations, it's basically the opening pleasantry. The Greeks have a saying about their Turkish neighbors. They either call you brother or they threaten to come in the night, sometimes both in the same week. But here's the part that rarely gets covered fairly. Turkey's frustration is not entirely irrational. The Aegean is one of the most island-dense bodies of water on Earth. Greek islands sit kilometers from Turkey's coastline. Under strict UNCLOS rules, which Greece uses and Turkey hasn't signed, those islands generate maritime zones that effectively surround Turkish access to the open sea. From Ankara's perspective, the legal framework that Greece is defending was designed at a time when Turkey wasn't at the table and creates a structural disadvantage that no country would quietly accept. That doesn't make the territorial pressure legal, but it does explain why the disagreement keeps coming back. Meanwhile, the TCG Anadolu, the drone carrier, has a logo on it: Blue Homeland. That phrase, Blue Homeland, or Mavi Vatan in Turkish, is Turkey's strategic doctrine for its maritime claims. It's not just a slogan on a missile, it's a map that stretches from the Black Sea across the Aegean and down through the Eastern Mediterranean, claiming maritime zones that overlap with Greek, Cypriot, and Egyptian claims. Greece calls it revisionist. Cyprus calls it illegal. Western analysts call it aggressive. Turkey's Navy calls it Tuesday. In 2026, the Blue Homeland 2026 exercise involved 120 ships, 50 aircraft, and 15,000 personnel operating simultaneously across the Black Sea, the Aegean, and the Eastern Mediterranean. That's not a drill, that's a demonstration of scale. What most coverage gets wrong is this: Turkey's maritime doctrine isn't just about Greece. It's about energy, about trade routes, about the fact that the Eastern Mediterranean has become one of the most contested maritime spaces on the planet, with Israeli, Greek, Egyptian, Cypriot, and Lebanese claims all overlapping, all tied to hydrocarbon deposits worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Turkey doesn't want to be on the outside of that conversation, and it has the Navy now to make sure it isn't. The submarine fleet deserves a special mention. Turkey operates modern diesel-electric submarines, the kind that are extremely difficult to detect and track. In shallow, geologically complex waters like the Aegean, those submarines give Turkey an asymmetric capability that no surface fleet can simply outrun. That's why when Greek and Turkish warships face off in the Aegean over a disputed gas field or a contested islet, it's never purely a surface confrontation. Somewhere below the water, there are submarines neither side is publicly acknowledging. But there's a version of Turkey that breaks both narratives entirely. Turkey as the mediator. The escalating Iran-Israel-US standoff has created one of the most complicated diplomatic positions in the region. Turkey borders Iran. It is a NATO member. It has functioning diplomatic channels with Israel. It has deep economic ties across the Gulf, and it controls the straits that matter to Russian naval mobility. Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has been running shuttle diplomacy between Tehran, Gulf capitals, Brussels, and Washington. Turkey condemned the strikes on Iran, but it didn't break with NATO. It didn't close the straits to American assets. It didn't recognize what Iran asked it to recognize. It sat in the middle and made itself useful to everyone simultaneously. The country that can talk to Russia and Ukraine simultaneously, sell drones to both while maintaining a ceasefire deal, host negotiations between Israel and Hamas, and still show up to NATO exercises with a drone carrier. That country has leverage. Real leverage. Not the leverage of a superpower that can bomb everyone into compliance. The leverage of the one person in the room that everyone still needs to call. Let's come back to the ground because the picture isn't complete without it. Turkey's land forces are not the most modernized in NATO. The army is large, around 355,000 active personnel, but it has older equipment in some formations, and has been through significant turbulence since the 2016 coup attempt, which led to a major restructuring and the dismissal of hundreds of senior officers. But Turkey has also been in more active combat operations over the last decade than almost any other NATO member. Counter-terrorism campaigns against Kurdish PKK forces across Iraq and Syria, the Libya intervention that tilted the civil war in Tripoli's favor, military support to Azerbaijan that contributed to the outcome of the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war. Those aren't theoretical exercises. That's a military being tested in the field, adapting in real time, and learning lessons that most European militaries only study in seminar rooms. The Bayraktar TB2's performance in all those theaters was essentially a live combat proving ground that no manufacturer can buy. Turkey went into those conflicts with a drone the world underestimated, watched it destroy armor, radar systems, and air defense batteries on camera, and came out with a global export order book worth billions. Lessons learned in blood are worth more than lessons learned in paper. February 2026, an ice-covered flight deck in the Baltic Sea. Turkish naval officers watching a drone they built, launching off a ship they built, firing a missile they built from a carrier concept they conceived when everyone told them it was impossible. The inscription on that missile read, "Blue Homeland knows no boundaries." Greece is furious about that phrase. Washington is watching it carefully. NATO is quietly incorporating the doctrine into alliance planning. Russia is very aware of who controls the straits. And Turkey is doing what Turkey has always done throughout 5 centuries of Ottoman legacy and 100 years of republic. It is using what it has, its geography, its engineers, its uncomfortable position at the crossroads of every crisis, to make sure nobody can afford to ignore it. The country whose drone carrier was called a gimmick just wrote new NATO doctrine in the freezing Baltic Sea. Turkey shocks people with loud reinvention. And in 2026, the reinvention is moving faster than anyone expected. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe. Because next, we're covering another power the world consistently underestimates. And trust me, once you see what they've been building while everyone else was distracted, you'll look at the map very differently.